Sarah Reynolds stood motionless on the courthouse steps, rain pelting her shoulders as she clutched a manila folder of bankruptcy papers. Water streamed down her face, mingling with tears she refused to acknowledge. The finality of it all settled like a stone in her chest. 36 years of life, 15 years in a career she'd once loved, all reduced to this moment, broke jobless and utterly alone. The Chicago skyline loomed behind her, a silhouette of steel and glass that had once represented possibility. Now it felt like a wall separating her from the life she'd built. Her fingers trembled as she stuffed the papers into her bag, the same leather messenger that had once carried ambitious architectural designs to boardroom presentations. Now it held only essentials, a change of clothes, her laptop, and the final notice of eviction from her Lincoln Park apartment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been senior project manager at Meridian Design Group, overseeing a portfolio of luxury developments. 3 weeks ago, before she'd refused to falsify safety reports on the Lakeside Heights project. 3 weeks ago, before she'd been escorted from the building by security, her reputation shredded by whispers of difficult and unstable. You made the right choice. The thought offered little comfort as she descended the courthouse steps, each one bringing her closer to the reality of having nowhere to go. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, another creditor likely. She ignored it. Let them chase the ghost of who she used to be. The rain intensified as Sarah ducked under the awning of a coffee shop. Inside, people carried on with normal lives, meetings, dates, casual conversations. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, suddenly aware of the vast distance between her world and theirs. Her phone vibrated again, persistent. With a sigh, she pulled it out, finger hovering over the decline button. Unknown number. Not a creditor then. Probably a spam call. She almost rejected it before a flicker of hope, maybe a response to one of the dozens of job applications she'd sent out, made her answer. Walter Monroe's voice carried the weight of years, gravelly and formal. The elderly attorney introduced himself as the executor of her father's estate. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. Robert Reynolds had been dead for 2 years, leaving behind nothing but a modest pension that barely covered his funeral expenses. Or so she'd thought. The attorney's words cut through her cynicism. Property in Ridge Valley, final wishes, paperwork requiring her signature. Her father, the man who'd spent his life working on railroads, who'd taught her to read blueprints before storybooks, who'd become increasingly distant as she grew into adulthood, had left her something after all. Not that it mattered now. Not when she was drowning. What's the address, Sarah asked, expecting some rundown shack, another burden to bear. The address Walter provided wasn't a street number, but a set of coordinates deep in the Appalachian foothills. A hollow feeling spread through her chest. Her father's final joke, perhaps sending her on a wild goose chase to the middle of nowhere. Just like the man who'd missed her college graduation because a freight line needed maintenance. When Sarah explained her current situation, Walter paused, then spoke with unexpected gentleness. The property was remote but inhabitable. If she needed a place to stay while sorting her affairs, it might serve. He'd even wire her the small balance remaining in her father's account, enough for a bus ticket and basic supplies. Out of options and with eviction looming, Sarah made a decision that felt like surrender. She'd go to Ridge Valley, sign whatever papers needed signing, sell whatever property existed, and use the money to rebuild. A detour, not a destination. The next morning, she stood at the Greyhound station, her entire life consolidated into one suitcase and a backpack. The balance from her father's account had been smaller than expected, $242. After the bus ticket, she had just under $200 to her name. The journey would take her through 4 states, ending at a station 30 miles from Ridge Valley, where Walter had arranged for the local mail carrier to give her a ride the rest of the way. As the bus pulled away from Chicago, Sarah forced herself not to look back. The city that had once been her canvas had become her prison. Perhaps distance would provide perspective. Perhaps in the quiet of the mountains, she'd find clarity about what came next. Hours bled into one another as the landscape transformed from urban sprawl to rolling countryside. Sarah's thoughts churned relentlessly, replaying the moment everything had unraveled. The project manager's voice smooth as oil. Just sign off on the report, Reynolds. The concrete mixture is close enough to spec. We're on deadline. Her refusal. The thinly veiled threat. The realization that this wasn't the first time corners had been cut. Just the first time she'd been asked to put her name on it. At a rest stop in West Virginia, Sarah opened her laptop and checked her email one last time before the battery died. Rejection after rejection. References couldn't be verified. Positions filled internally. The industry had closed ranks around her. As the bus wound through increasingly remote terrain, Sarah pulled out the envelope Walter had given her at their brief meeting. Inside was a letter yellowed with age, addressed to her in her father's precise engineer's handwriting. My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've found your way to Ridge Valley. I've never been good with words or timing a failing that cost me my marriage, and I fear my relationship with you. But I've always tried to prepare to build foundations strong enough to withstand whatever comes. What I leave you isn't much by city standards, but it's something I believe you'll understand better than anyone else could. Something that, like you, was abandoned but never broken. The true inheritance isn't in the deed or the land. It's in what waits on the old Highland line where time stopped but possibility didn't. Your mother never understood why I kept going back there. Perhaps you will. With love, Dad folded inside the letter was a hand-drawn map marked with trails and landmarks that meant nothing to Sarah, and a newspaper clipping so old the edges crumbled at her touch. Highland Railway decommissioned after 52 years of service, the headline read. The article dated July 1975 briefly mentioned an incident that had led to the closure but provided no details. Sarah stared out the window watching mist curl around pine-covered mountains. What had her father been doing in this remote corner of Appalachia for all these years? He'd always claimed his frequent absences were for consulting jobs across the country. Now she wondered if he'd been coming here instead to whatever waited in Ridge Valley. The bus driver's voice jarred her from her thoughts. Final stop approaching. Sarah gathered her belongings, a knot forming in her stomach. This wasn't part of her plan. None of this was. The station turned out to be little more than a weathered bench beside a general store. As the bus pulled away, Sarah stood alone on the roadside, the enormity of her decision suddenly clear. The air felt different here, cleaner, heavier, with moisture. Silence expanded around her, broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of rushing water. No mail carrier waited to take her the final 30 miles. No phone service allowed her to call Walter. The store was closed, a handwritten sign indicating it wouldn't open until tomorrow. Sarah checked her watch, 4:37 p.m. Daylight would last a few more hours. According to the map, Ridge Valley lay northeast following a state highway that wound through the mountains. She could start walking, hope for a ride, or wait until morning. Pride won out over practicality. She'd come this far. She wouldn't spend her first night sleeping on a bench. Adjusting her backpack and gripping her suitcase, Sarah began to walk. The road climbed steadily, each curve revealing vistas more breathtaking than the last. Despite her circumstances, Sarah couldn't help admiring the engineering of the highway, the way it hugged the mountain's contours, the precise calculation of each grade and banking. Her father would have appreciated this road. The thought came unbidden, accompanied by a pang of something between grief and resentment. An hour passed, then another. No cars came. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. Sarah's arms ached from carrying the suitcase, and her city boots, chosen for style over function, had rubbed blisters on both heels. As dusk approached, she heard a faint, distant whistle, almost like a train, but somehow more human. It seemed to come from somewhere off the highway down a barely visible trail to her right. The sound came again, closer this time. A melody she recognized from childhood, her father's whistle, a pattern of notes he'd used to find her in department stores or crowded parks. Impossible. Her rational mind rejected it immediately. Just the wind or some local bird she didn't recognize. Yet when it came a third time, something pulled her toward the sound, toward the narrow trail leading into the dense forest. The path was overgrown, but still discernible, winding between ancient trees and moss-covered boulders. Sarah hesitated, looking back at the highway. Logic said to stay on the main road, but the map in her hand showed this trail too marked with her father's initials, RR. The whistle came again, fainter now, as if moving away. Sarah made her decision. Setting her suitcase behind a boulder where she could retrieve it later, she kept only her backpack and followed the trail, marking her path with broken branches. The forest grew denser, the light dimmer. Just as she began to question her decision, she emerged into a small clearing and stopped short. Before her lay a set of railroad tracks, nearly hidden beneath years of vegetation. They ran perpendicular to her path, disappearing into the forest in both directions. Sarah knelt, brushing away leaves to reveal steel rails, rusted but still solid. These tracks appeared on no modern map, yet here they were, the Highland line from the newspaper clipping. She stood, a strange certainty guiding her. East, something whispered. Go east. Following the tracks eastward, Sarah pushed through undergrowth, ducked under fallen trees, and scrambled over rocky outcroppings. The terrain grew steeper, the tracks curving around the mountain's shoulder. The sun had nearly set when she rounded a final bend and froze. Ahead, the tracks passed through a stone tunnel. Its entrance partially collapsed but still passable. Beyond it, barely visible in the fading light, sat three weathered train cars. Their once blue paint faded to a ghostly gray. Sarah approached slowly, as if the scene might dissolve if she moved too quickly. The cars rested on a level stretch of track that ended at the edge of a small plateau overlooking the valley below. Nature had begun reclaiming them. Vines crawled up their sides and small saplings grew between the rails. But they remained largely intact, a time capsule from another era. The lead car was a passenger coach with tall windows, many cracked or broken. Behind it sat what appeared to be a dining or observation car, its curved panoramic windows reflecting the last golden rays of sunset. The final car was a freight carrier, more utilitarian than the others. Sarah circled the train, equal parts bewildered and fascinated. This had to be what her father's letter referred to. But why would he leave her abandoned train cars in the middle of nowhere? As she examined the exterior of the passenger coach, she noticed a loose window frame. Standing on tiptoe, she peered inside. Rows of seats, their upholstery torn and faded face forward, like silent witnesses to decades of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that penetrated the dirty windows. The door handle turned with a protesting screech. Sarah winced at the sound, then pulled harder. The door finally gave way, its hinges shrieking like tortured metal. The smell hit her immediately, musty damp with undertones of old leather and something metallic. She hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware that she was trespassing. But on whose property? Her father's letter suggested this was her inheritance. With newfound purpose, she stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty car. The interior was in better condition than she'd expected. Years of exposure had taken their toll, but the essential structure remained sound. Sarah moved carefully down the center aisle, testing floorboards before putting her full weight on them. Her architect's eye cataloged issues: automatically water damage to the ceiling, rotting sections of flooring, compromised window seals, probable mold behind wall panels. All fixable with time and resources. The thought startled her. She wasn't staying. This wasn't part of her plan. She'd come to sign papers, sell whatever this was, and go. Yet something about the space resonated with her, whispering of possibilities. A soft knock on the train's exterior made her heart leap into her throat. Sarah turned to find an elderly woman standing in the doorway, wrapped in a woolen shawl despite the summer evening's warmth. Gray hair pulled back in a neat bun framed a face mapped with wrinkles, eyes sharp and assessing. She carried a basket of apples, incongruously domestic in this wild setting. You must be Robert's daughter. The woman's voice held the distinctive cadence of Appalachia vowels stretched and consonants softened. Her statement left no room for denial. Sarah nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. I'm Sarah. How did you... The woman's smile revealed a lifetime of stories. I'm Margaret Wilson. I've looked after this yard for decades. Your father spoke of you often during his visits. Visits, the word hung between them. How often had her father come here while claiming to be elsewhere? Margaret seemed to read her thoughts. He came every few months for years, more frequently toward the end. The end. Such a gentle euphemism for death. Sarah swallowed against the unexpected tightness in her throat. Do you know why he bought this? She gestured at the train cars. It was never about ownership for Robert. Margaret stepped fully inside, setting her basket on an old seat. These cars were abandoned after the line closed in '75. The company went bankrupt. No one wanted them, too remote to salvage, for parts too costly to remove. They became part of the mountain. She ran a weathered hand along a brass handrail, her touch reverent. Your father found them on a hiking trip in the early '80s, fell in love with them immediately. Something about second chances, he'd say. Sarah tried to reconcile this sentiment with the pragmatic engineer who'd raised her. My father said he left me property. Is there a house somewhere? Margaret's laugh came soft and quick, like summer rain. No house, child. just these three cars and the acre of land beneath them. He bought them for $1 from the bankruptcy trustee, said someday they'd be yours. $1. Her father had spent her childhood pinching pennies, working overtime, missing her school events to make ends meet. Yet he'd invested time and emotion in train cars that served no purpose. The familiar resentment bubbled up, then subsided as she looked around. Whatever his reasons, this place had mattered to him. Margaret watched her with knowing eyes. There's a toolbox in the freight car. His tools, plans, ideas. I kept them safe like I promised. She reached into her basket and produced an old iron key. If you want them, they're yours, for $1. Sarah blinked. You want me to buy them? But if my father owned them, technically he never registered the deed. Margaret's expression remained neutral. Legal ownership stayed with the trustee who passed it to me years ago. I'm offering the same deal he got. $1 for 3 cars and an acre. Fair market value considering the condition. It was absurd. Sarah had come seeking financial salvation, not another burden. Yet something about the old woman's steady gaze suggested this wasn't just a transaction. With a sigh that felt like surrender, Sarah reached for her wallet and extracted her last dollar bill. The symbolism wasn't lost on her rock bottom with nowhere to go but up. Margaret took the bill with surprising formality, then produced a handwritten receipt from her pocket, as if she'd expected this outcome all along. It's yours now. All yours. Her voice softened. He always knew you'd come eventually. Sarah wanted to object that she wasn't staying, that this was temporary, but the words caught in her throat. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, transforming the dilapidated car into something almost magical. For just a moment, she glimpsed what her father might have seen, not ruins but potential. Margaret turned to go, then paused. There's a cabin half a mile down the track where I stay most nights. Smoke from my chimney is visible from here. If you need anything, follow the track west, she gestured to the basket. Those apples should tide you over till morning. Wait, Sarah stepped forward. Is there, electricity, running water? How do people live up here? We manage. Margaret's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Some have generators. Most collect rainwater. We're not completely cut off from civilization, just selective about which parts we embrace. She nodded toward the freight car. Your father left detailed plans. He knew you'd have questions. With that cryptic statement, Margaret disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Sarah alone with her inexplicable inheritance. Night fell quickly in the mountains. Sarah used her phone's flashlight to explore the other cars, finding them in similar states of romantic decay. The dining car retained its curved banquettes and long service counter. The freight car, sturdiest of the three, contained the promised toolbox, a massive metal chest bearing her father's initials, and various supplies covered with tarps. Too exhausted to investigate further, Sarah returned to the passenger car and cleared debris from a section of seating. Using her jacket as a pillow and her emergency blanket as bedding, she created a makeshift camp. Through broken windows, stars appeared brighter than she'd ever seen them in Chicago. This isn't permanent, she reminded herself as sleep approached. Just a temporary shelter until I figure things out. Sarah woke to golden light streaming through dusty windows and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where she was. Reality rushed back as she sat up, muscles protesting from the uncomfortable night on narrow seats. The train car looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more dilapidated. Water stains mapped the ceiling in archipelagos of decay. The floor beneath her makeshift bed sagged ominously. She stretched, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulders, and tried to formulate a plan. First priority, assess what she had to work with. Then decide whether to sell immediately or invest minimal effort to increase the property's value. The freight car seemed the logical place to start. Sarah picked her way through the passenger and dining cars, noting structural issues with professional detachment. Water damage, mold, rotting wood, all expected after decades of neglect. Yet the core steel framework appeared surprisingly sound, protected from the worst elements by the car's elevated position in the surrounding tree canopy. The freight car's sliding door moved reluctantly, protesting with metallic shrieks. Inside, morning light filtered through high windows, illuminating a space that felt more like a workshop than cargo storage. Her father's toolbox dominated one corner, a behemoth of industrial steel. Beside it stood workbenches fashioned from salvaged lumber. Tarps covered bulky shapes along the walls. Sarah approached the toolbox first. The padlock opened with the same key Margaret had given her. Inside lay rows of meticulously organized tools, many bearing the patina of age and use, but all clean and rust-free. Hammers, wrenches, chisels, planes, saws, a craftsman's collection, not a hobbyist's. Beneath the top tray, she found her father's engineering notebooks, their pages filled with his precise handwriting and detailed sketches. Train car schematics, renovation plans, structural calculations, years of work all focused on transforming these abandoned cars into something habitable. Sarah sat back on her heels, a complex emotion rising in her chest. Her father, the man who'd seemed perpetually distracted during her childhood, who'd missed recitals and parent-teacher conferences for work emergencies, had poured his heart into this place. While she was building her career, believing he'd forgotten her, he'd been creating. What a gift, a legacy. The Lentz notebook contained more personal entries. Sarah hesitated before reading, feeling like an intruder in her father's private thoughts. But her name appeared frequently enough to overcome her reluctance. Spent the weekend reinforcing floor joists in the passenger car. Used oak salvaged from the old Miller barn should last another century. Told Sarah I was in Denver for a consulting job. Hate the lies, but she wouldn't understand. Not yet. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. More lies unearthed years after they mattered. She flipped forward several pages. Sarah made partner at her firm today. Read about it online. Wanted to call, tell her I'm proud, but our conversations always end in arguments. Better to finish this project, leave it for her, as proof of what I couldn't say. The last entry, dated just weeks before his death, hit hardest. Doctor says, time's running shorter than we thought. Won't see Christmas. Considered calling Sarah, telling her everything. Decided against it. Some truths are better discovered than told. She'll find this place when she's ready, when she needs it. Hopefully the train will tell her what I never could. Sarah closed the notebook, her vision blurring. Grief and frustration tangled with belated understanding. Her father had been building this for her while keeping her at arm's length. The contradiction felt cruelly on brand for their relationship. A loud crack from outside interrupted her thoughts. Sarah moved to the freight car's door, peering out to see dark clouds massing above the mountains. The air had turned heavy electric with approaching storm energy. If Chicago storms were theatrical productions, mountain storms were primal forces, raw and untamed. She needed to prepare. The notebooks had mentioned leaks in the passenger car roof, and she'd already spotted several broken windows. With limited options, Sarah decided the dining car offered the best immediate shelter. Its roof appeared more intact, and its elevated position on the mountain face would provide better drainage. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Sarah hurriedly transferred her belongings to the dining car, setting up camp in the driest corner. She found tarpaulins in the freight car and covered the worst window breaks using tools from her father's collection to secure them temporarily. The storm hit with sudden violence. Rain lashed horizontally, finding every crack and gap in the car's exterior. Wind howled through broken windows, creating eerie whistles and moans as it navigated the train's deteriorated body. Despite her preparations, water soon began pooling on the floor. Sarah grabbed an empty bucket she'd noticed earlier and positioned it under the worst leak, its metallic ping marking each invasive drop. More leaks appeared, forcing her into an absurd dance, moving containers as each new vulnerability revealed itself. Lightning flashed, illuminating the car in stark relief. In that frozen moment, Sarah saw the enormity of the task before her. Not just temporary shelter, but comprehensive rehabilitation. This wasn't a weekend DIY project. It was months of intensive work. Work she wasn't equipped for financially or technically. Thunder followed so powerful it seemed to shake the train on its tracks. Through a clear section of window, Sarah watched trees bend nearly horizontal in the gale. If the train had withstood decades of such assaults, perhaps her father's faith in its bones wasn't misplaced. Water began seeping under her makeshift bed. Sarah grabbed her backpack and retreated to the counter area, which sat slightly higher than the main floor. As she moved, her foot caught on a loose board, nearly sending her sprawling. Catching herself on the counter's edge, she knelt to examine the hazard. The floorboard wasn't just loose, it appeared deliberately altered. A closer look revealed concealed hinges and a small finger hole at one end. Sarah hesitated, then pulled. The board lifted, revealing a small compartment beneath the floor. Inside lay a metal box roughly the size of a hardcover book. Sarah extracted it carefully, surprised by its weight. No lock secured it, just a simple latch that opened with gentle pressure. The box contained, the box contained photographs, most in black and white, showing the train in its operating days. Smiling passengers posed on platforms. Conductors stood proudly beside gleaming cars. Landscapes unfurled behind observation windows. History preserved in silver nitrate. At the bottom of the stack, one photo stood out her father as a young man, perhaps 30, standing beside another man of similar age in front of these very train cars. Both wore work clothes, tools in hand. On the back, written in faded ink, July 1975, last day, RR and WM. The truth stays buried. The photo slipped from Sarah's fingers as a tremendous crack split the night. Not thunder, something closer, more immediate. A tree's branch, ripped free by the storm, crashed onto the roof directly above her. The impact sent vibrations through the entire car. Dust and debris showered down, and a new leak opened, water streaming rather than dripping. Sarah scrambled to secure the photos and her belongings as the situation deteriorated rapidly. The storm's fury intensified, water finding new entry points with each gust. Sleep became impossible as she fought a losing battle against the elements, moving constantly to avoid the worst leaks. By midnight, she sat huddled on the counter, surrounded by her few possessions, watching water inch across the floor. The wind screamed accusations. "You don't belong here. You can't handle this. You've failed again." Sarah almost believed them. Almost. Something shifted in her as she watched her father's photograph as threatened by the encroaching water. A stubborn spark ignited, reminiscent of how she'd felt facing down corporate pressure to falsify reports. That decision had cost her everything, but it had also revealed what she was made of. Moving with sudden purpose, Sarah retrieved tools from her father's box. Using the flashlight function on her nearly dead phone, she located the source of the worst leak. The fallen branch had damaged a section of roof, creating a direct path for rainwater. With hammer nails and a piece of sheet metal she found under a tarp, Sarah improvised a patch. The repair required venturing onto the roof, a fool's errand in such conditions. But the alternative meant watching her inheritance dissolve before she'd even decided if she wanted it. Wrapping herself in a tarp like a makeshift poncho, Sarah climbed through a roof access hatch, emerged into the full fury of the storm, and began her desperate repair. Rain pelted her face, nearly blinding her. Wind threatened to tear her from her precarious perch. Lightning illuminated her work in staccato bursts. Every instinct screamed for retreat, but Sarah pressed on, securing the metal patch over the damaged section with increasingly numb fingers. The repair wouldn't win any engineering awards, but it stemmed the worst of the flooding. Soaked and shivering, Sarah returned inside to find the leak reduced to a manageable drip. Small victory, but hers. She'd bought herself and the train a little more time. Dawn broke clear and brilliant, the storm having exhausted itself sometime before sunrise. Sarah stepped outside, surveying the aftermath. Branches and debris littered the ground around the train. Water dripped from every surface, glittering in the morning light. Steam rose from sun-warmed metal, creating an ethereal mist that softened the train's dilapidated edges. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: accomplishment. She'd faced a challenge and survived. The victory was minor, perhaps even temporary, but it was hers. Her phone was dead, her clothes were damp, and her future remained uncertain. Yet as she stood watching the valley emerge from morning mist, Sarah felt a strange connection to this improbable place, a connection that transcended ownership papers or inheritance. Maybe her father had been right. Maybe she had needed this, though not in the way he'd imagined. Not as shelter from financial ruin, but as proof that she could build something from nothing, that she could weather storms both literal and metaphorical. Sarah turned back to the train, seeing it now through different eyes. Not as a burden or an escape route, but as a challenge, a project, perhaps even a home eventually. The dining car's floor remained damp, but her improvised roof patch had held. Sunlight streamed through grimy windows, highlighting decades of dust, but also unexpected details. Ornate brass fixtures, Art Deco styling in the woodwork, the graceful curve of the observation area. Beauty beneath the decay. Sarah's architectural training kicked in, cataloging the space's potential. The passenger car could become living quarters, its row seating removed to create an open floor plan. The dining car, with its panoramic views, would make a stunning great room. The freight car offered workshop space or additional living area. She caught herself mid-plan. This was madness. She had no money-limited construction experience and no practical way to transform abandoned train cars into habitable space. Chicago called not with open arms, but with familiar challenges and structures. And yet, Sarah retrieved her father's notebooks, this time reading with purpose rather than emotion. His plans were methodical, breaking down the renovation into manageable phases. Phase 1 focused on basic habitability, structural repairs, weather protection, simple systems for water collection, and waste management. Later phases addressed aesthetics and comfort improvements. Most critically, his notes included cost estimates and material sources. Many materials could be salvaged from abandoned structures in the area or purchased at minimal cost. Labor, his most significant investment, would be her contribution. A sound from outside drew Sarah's attention. Margaret approached along the tracks carrying what appeared to be a thermos and a small bundle. Her weathered face revealed nothing as she surveyed the storm damage. "You survived your first mountain tempest. No small achievement." She handed Sarah the thermos. Coffee? Black. The hot liquid revived Sarah's depleted spirits. She hadn't realized how desperately she needed caffeine until that first bitter sip. "Thank you." Margaret unwrapped her bundle, revealing homemade biscuits and a jar of preserves. "Figured you might be hungry." Her sharp eyes took in Sarah's disheveled appearance and the improvised roof patch. Not many city folks would have thought to make repairs mid-storm. Sarah accepted a biscuit, suddenly ravenous. It wasn't a choice. That branch would have flooded everything. Margaret's smile came slowly, revealing deep creases around her eyes. That's how it starts. Necessity, then determination, then pride. Sarah found herself responding to the woman's quiet certainty. "I'm not staying. I can't just live in abandoned train cars." "Why not?" Margaret settled onto a fallen log, spreading preserves on her biscuit with deliberate care. "Your father did whenever he visited. Had big plans for this place. For you." Sarah bristled. "He never told me about any of this. Never asked what I wanted. He was a complicated man." Margaret's tone held neither judgment nor defense. Believed in actions over words. Thought this place would speak for itself when the time came. Frustration welled in Sarah's chest. That's not how relationships work. You can't just build something and expect it to substitute for actual communication. Margaret nodded slowly. No argument there. But he's gone now and this remains. The question is, what will you do with it? The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. "I don't know, sell it probably." "To whom?" Margaret gestured at the remote location. No road access, no utilities. 3 derelict train cars on a mountainside. Not exactly prime real estate. Her expression softened. "Give yourself time to decide. Stay a few weeks. Worst case, you leave with the same nothing you arrived with." The logic was difficult to refute. Sarah had no job waiting, no apartment, no pressing obligations. Just a wealth of debt and a career in shambles. What did she have to lose by staying at least long enough to increase the property's potential value? "I'd need supplies. Basic tools. Food." Sarah heard herself engaging with the idea, surprising herself. "And I don't know the first thing about renovation on this scale." Margaret stood brushing crumbs from her lap. "Hardware store in town. Frank's Cafe has Wi-Fi and decent food, plus he's looking for part-time help. 3 days a week would cover basic expenses." She nodded toward the freight to him. As for renovation knowledge, Robert left more than just notebooks. He left a lifetime of expertise written down for whoever cared to read it. Sarah wanted to object that book knowledge couldn't replace hands-on experience, but she'd already proven herself capable of emergency repairs. With proper tools and materials, how much more could she accomplish? For the first time since losing her job, Sarah felt a flicker of purpose. Not resignation, not acceptance, active choice. This abandoned train on its forgotten track offered something Chicago couldn't, a blank canvas free from others' expectations or judgments. Margaret seemed to read her thoughts. "Your father always said these cars were waiting for the right person to bring them back to life. He believed that person was you." She gestured toward the toolbox visible through the freight car door. "Those tools have been quiet too long." As Margaret departed with promises to return the next day, Sarah stood at the edge of the small plateau, looking out over the valley below. Towns nestled in distant folds of green. Roads wound like ribbons through the landscape. Somewhere out there lay the life she'd lost, and perhaps someday a new one she'd build. But for now, there was this 3 train cars on a mountain, a box of tools, and the strange inheritance of possibility. Sarah spent the rest of the morning exploring her new domain with methodical precision. She measured each car, noting dimensions and structural features in a small notebook. The passenger car stretched 67 feet, its interior divided by rows of decaying seats. The dining car, slightly shorter at 60 feet, retained its curved observation area and service counters. The freight car, sturdiest of the 3 at 55 feet, offered the best immediate shelter with its reinforced flooring and fewer windows. As she worked, Sarah discovered something unexpected, an intuitive understanding of the train's construction. Studying the jointwork, the load-bearing elements, the circulation systems, she recognized her father's influence. He taught her to read blueprints as a child, explained stress factors in weight distribution, during museum visits pointed out architectural features on their rare vacations together. Knowledge she'd built upon in her career, never acknowledging its source. Sarah opened her father's toolbox again, this time with practical intent. Each tool fit her hand, as if designed for it. Working with them felt natural, almost like muscle memory. When she encountered an unfamiliar implement, one of her father's notebooks usually contained an explanation of its purpose and proper use. By mid-afternoon, she'd compiled a comprehensive assessment. The challenges were substantial: extensive water damage, compromised structural elements, no utilities, limited access. Yet the opportunities were equally compelling: sound core structure, manageable size, extraordinary location, and the freedom to reimagine everything. Sarah created a rough priority list, focusing on immediate necessities. 1. Create one weatherproof, secure space for sleeping. 2. Establish water collection system and develop safe waste disposal. Secure food storage against wildlife. Address critical structural weaknesses. Longer-term improvements could wait until these basics were addressed. Sarah reviewed her remaining funds, $176.32. Not enough for significant materials, but perhaps enough for starter supplies and food until she could secure income. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across her newly acquired domain, Sarah made a decision. She'd give this project 1 month, 4 weeks to determine whether renovation was feasible or foolish. 4 weeks to decide if her father's strange legacy was truly meant for her. The next morning, Sarah hiked back to the highway where she'd left her suitcase, retrieving it from behind the boulder. The walk to town took nearly 2 hours, the return trip to the train closer to 3, as she navigated the unfamiliar trail with her bulky luggage. Ridge Valley proved to be a single-street town with architecture frozen in the 1950s. The hardware store, operated by a skeptical but ultimately helpful man named Benjamin Porter, provided basic supplies at reasonable prices. Tarpaulins, nails, a hammer to supplement her father's tools, work gloves, and a battery-powered lantern. At Frank's Cafe, Sarah negotiated a 3-day work schedule and secured their Wi-Fi password. The cafe owner, a gruff man in his 60s, seemed perpetually suspicious, but agreed to her terms: minimum wage plus 1 meal per shift. She'd start Monday, 4 days away. The general store yielded enough non-perishable food for a week, plus a solar phone charger that cost more than Sarah wanted to spend, but seemed essential for safety. As she completed her purchases, Sarah became aware of whispers and stares. A woman at the counter asked directly, "You the one living in the old train cars up on a Highland Pass?" Word traveled fast in small towns. Sarah nodded, unwilling to elaborate. The woman's expression mixed curiosity with something like pity. Brave or crazy, can't decide which. By the time Sarah returned to the train, shadows had lengthened and her arms ached from carrying the supplies. She'd spent nearly half her remaining money and gained only the most basic necessities. Yet she felt a strange satisfaction reminiscent of her early days in architecture, when possibilities seemed limitless. That evening, Sarah arranged her minimal living space in the freight car using tarps to create a windbreak around her sleeping area. She organized her tools, prepared a simple meal of canned soup heated over a small camp stove, and reviewed her plans for the next day. As darkness fell, Sarah lit her lantern and opened her father's most detailed notebook. His voice seemed to rise from the pages, practical and precise. She fell asleep reading his instructions for reinforcing floor joists, his words merging with her dreams of solid foundations and structures that would withstand any storm. Days blurred together as Sarah established her routine. Mornings began with physical labor, clearing debris, removing damaged materials, salvaging what could be reused. Afternoons focused on specific repairs, beginning with the freight car roof, to ensure she had a reliably dry sleeping space. Evenings were for planning and studying her father's notes, learning through his meticulous documentation. Each small victory, a repaired section of flooring, a reinforced wall panel, a window properly sealed against rain, built her confidence. Sarah discovered abilities she hadn't known she possessed, adapting designs to available materials, improvising tools for specific tasks, solving problems with limited resources. Margaret visited regularly, sometimes bringing food or supplies, other times simply offering company and local knowledge. From her, Sarah learned the train's history, how it had once been part of the Highland Scenic Railway, carrying passengers through the mountains until a mysterious incident in 1975 led to the line's closure. Margaret spoke vaguely of controversies, corporate decisions, and community impacts, but deflected whenever Sarah pressed for details about her father's involvement. On her fourth day, as Sarah struggled to move a heavy steel beam, she heard footsteps on the gravel outside, too heavy for Margaret's slight frame. A man's voice called out, rough but not unfriendly, "Hello, anybody home?" Sarah emerged from the freight car to find a tall, weathered figure examining her roof repair with critical interest. Gray hair and beard framed a face mapped with lines that spoke of outdoor living. He wore worn work clothes and carried a toolbox that made her father's collection seem modest by comparison. Jack Miller introduced himself without preamble, explaining he had been hunting when he heard hammering. Curiosity had drawn him to investigate. His eyes narrowed as they swept over Sarah's work assessment, plain in his expression. "That support beam needs reinforcing before you hang anything from it. Your roof patch won't last through winter. And whatever you're planning for that west wall, reconsider. It gets the worst weather." Sarah bristled at his critique, then recognized the expertise behind it. "Are you a contractor?" Jack's laugh emerged like rusty machinery rarely used. "Was. Retired now. Built houses, barns, bridges. Started on the railroad when I was younger than you." His mention of railroads sparked Sarah's interest. "Did you know these cars? Work on this line?" Something flickered in Jack's expression, recognition, perhaps, or wariness. His response came carefully measured. "Worked the Highland line from 68 to 75, till it closed." He gestured at the passenger car. This was the Blue Ridge Express, 3 cars specialized service. Used to run from Charlottesville to Ashland, with stops at mining towns along the way. Beautiful route. Sarah hesitated, then retrieved the photograph she'd found during the storm, her father and the unidentified man standing before these very cars. "Do you recognize either of these men?" Jack studied the image, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he handed it back without comment. "A lot of men work these rails. Can't place every face." His evasion was obvious, but Sarah chose not to press. Instead, she mentioned the support beam he'd criticized, asking how he'd approach the repair. Jack's demeanor shifted immediately, enthusiasm replacing caution, as he launched into a detailed explanation of proper reinforcement techniques. Before Sarah fully realized what was happening, Jack had set down his toolbox and begun demonstrating the correct approach. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, making adjustments that would have taken her days to figure out independently. By sunset, they'd reinforced the beam properly and identified 3 other critical structural issues requiring immediate attention. As Jack packed his tools to leave, Sarah offered what little she could, thanks, in a share of her simple dinner. He declined the food but paused before departing. "I've got salvage materials at my place. Steel plates that would secure those loose sections. Roofing material better than those tarps. Might bring some by tomorrow if you're interested." Sarah recognized the offer's significance, not just materials, but expertise freely given. She accepted gratefully, asking what she could offer in exchange. Jack's weathered face remained impassive. "Nothing needed. Been a while since I worked on anything worthwhile. Gets boring retirement." He glanced at the train, something like recognition in his eyes. These old cars deserve better than slow decay. After he left, Sarah returned to the photograph as she was studying the young man beside her father. The initials WM matched what she now knew to be Jack's profession, Williams Miller, but she couldn't be certain. Whatever connection existed between Jack and her father, the older man clearly wasn't ready to acknowledge it. That night, Sarah dreamed of trains in motion, wheels clicking rhythmically over joints in the track. In her dream, she stood at the observation window, watching landscapes blur past not the Appalachian Mountains, but Chicago's skyline receding behind her. She awoke with tears on her cheeks, uncertain whether they represented loss or relief. Jack returned the next day as promised, his truck bed loaded with salvaged materials far superior to what Sarah could have afforded. Without fanfare, he began working alongside her, offering guidance without taking control. They fell into an unexpected rhythm, her architectural knowledge complementing his practical experience. When Sarah asked why he was helping, Jack's answer came wrapped in practicality. Someone needs to ensure this renovation won't collapse in the first winter storm. Might as well be me. Nothing on TV anyway. Days stretched into a week. Sarah's hands grew calloused, her skin tanned from outdoor work. Frank's Cafe provided steady, if minimal, income, while the train steadily transformed under her and Jack's combined efforts. The freight car now boasted a properly sealed roof, reinforced flooring, and weather-tight windows. It had become genuinely habitable if Spartan. In town, Sarah heard whispers about the crazy woman on the mountain living in abandoned train cars. Some voices carried skepticism or mockery, others curiosity. Mayor Jenkins, a portly man with political ambitions, stopped her outside the hardware store to express concerns about zoning regulations and building codes. His words carried veiled warnings about unauthorized dwellings and liability issues. Sarah smiled politely and changed the subject, but the encounter left her uneasy. She mentioned it to Jack the next day as they installed a simple rainwater collection system. Jack's expression darkened. Jenkins has been pushing development deals for years, wants to turn these mountains into vacation homes for rich folks from D.C. He adjusted a gutter with unnecessary force. Your little project doesn't fit his vision. Is that why no one developed this area before? Sarah asked, connecting pieces of the puzzle. Jack focused intently on his work. The land around the train has complications, ownership disputes, access issues, environmental concerns. He straightened, looking directly at her for the first time that day. Your father knew all about it. That's why he bought these cars when no one else would touch them. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Jack changed the subject, pointing out a structural issue that needed immediate attention. The moment for revelation had passed, but Sarah filed away his comments, adding them to her growing collection of mysteries surrounding her inheritance. That evening, alone in her increasingly comfortable freight car home, Sarah unfolded her father's map again. Studying it more carefully, she noticed markings she'd previously overlooked, symbols indicating water sources, notations about soil conditions, and boundaries marked with question marks. Not just a trail map, but an assessment of the property and its surroundings. In the corner, barely visible in fading ink, she found a notation. Marshall claim disputed 1975 documents in observation car wall panel, north side. Sarah's pulse quickened. Tomorrow she'd investigate the dining car's wall panels. Another piece of the puzzle waited there, perhaps the key to understanding why her father had invested so much in this remote location and why Jack Miller looked at the photograph with such careful neutrality. As she drifted toward sleep, wind whispered through the valley, carrying sounds that might have been distant whistle signals. Sarah listened, imagining her father doing the same years earlier, planning and building in this unlikely place, creating something he believed would someday matter to his daughter. For the first time since arriving, she acknowledged a truth she'd been resisting. It already did. Sarah woke at dawn, determined to investigate the dining car's wall panels. Jack wouldn't arrive for hours, giving her privacy for exploration that felt strangely like trespassing, despite her ownership. Morning mist clung to the mountainside as she crossed between cars, her boots leaving dark imprints in the dew-soaked grass. The dining car felt different in early morning light, less dilapidated, more dignified in its decay. Art Deco details emerged from shadows, geometric patterns carved into wooden panels, brass fixtures, tarnished but intact curved glass, designed to showcase panoramic views. Sarah ran her fingers along the north wall, searching for anomalies. The paneling here differed subtly: tighter seams, extra fasteners suggesting reinforcement, or perhaps concealment. No obvious access point presented itself. Sarah retrieved her father's notebooks, searching for clues. In the third volume, she found a small notation. Panel 7N, pressure point at lower right corner, activates spring mechanism. She counted panels from the car's entrance and located the seventh indistinguishable from its neighbors, except for a slight discoloration at one corner. Sarah pressed experimentally. Nothing happened. She applied more force, then tried different angles. Just as frustration mounted, a soft click preceded the panel popping forward by half an inch. Sarah's breath caught. She slid her fingers into the gap and pulled gently. The panel swung outward on concealed hinges, revealing a shallow compartment built into the wall. Inside lay a manila envelope, its contents preserved by the car's relatively stable interior climate. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she extracted it, feeling like an archaeologist uncovering long-buried secrets. The envelope contained several documents, a geological survey report dated June 1975, correspondence between William Marshall Mining Corporation and Highland Railway, black and white photographs of waterways showing obvious pollution, and a formal complaint filed with environmental authorities. Most significant was an affidavit signed by William Marshall and witnessed by Robert Reynolds detailing systematic contamination of local groundwater by the mining operation. Sarah spread the documents across a dining table, pieces falling into place. William Marshall WM from the photograph, possibly the company owner or a relative, had discovered his own corporation was poisoning water sources. Rather than conceal this information, he documented it, enlisting her father's help as a witness. The final document, dated just days before the line's closure, outlined a plan to transport evidence and witnesses to federal authorities in Richmond. That journey never happened. According to the newspaper clipping about the line's closure, an incident had occurred, the nature of which was never specified. Sarah's mind raced with implications. Had someone sabotaged the train to prevent exposure of the environmental crimes? What had happened to William Marshall? Footsteps on gravel interrupted her thoughts. Sarah quickly gathered the documents, conflicted about sharing her discovery. Through the window, she saw Jack approaching with lumber and tools. His weathered face betrayed nothing, but Sarah now viewed him through a lens of suspicion. Jack Miller. William Marshall. The matching initials couldn't be coincidence. Sarah concealed the documents in her backpack before greeting Jack. His response to her forced cheerfulness was a raised eyebrow, but he asked no questions as they began work reinforcing the passenger car's flooring. Throughout the morning, Sarah studied him surreptitiously, searching for resemblance to the young man in the photograph, calculating his age against the timeline. If Jack noticed her scrutiny, he gave no indication, focusing instead on teaching her proper techniques for sister joisting damaged floor sections. His knowledge flowed freely, his calloused hands demonstrating each step with patience born of experience. Whatever secrets he harbored didn't interfere with his genuine desire to ensure her safety through proper construction. By midday, they'd made significant progress. Jack's expertise had accelerated what would have taken Sarah days to accomplish alone. During their break, she decided on an indirect approach. That incident that closed the rail line. What actually happened? Jack's body tensed imperceptibly. His gaze remained fixed on the sandwich he'd brought. Equipment failure. Brake malfunction on a steep grade. Official finding was operator error, but some of us knew better. Sarah pressed gently. Knew what exactly? The Highland Line had powerful enemies. The mining companies controlled everything back then, just politics, even law enforcement. Jack's voice lowered. When the line started carrying environmental inspectors instead of just coal, certain interests got nervous. Sarah considered her next words carefully. My father was an engineer, not an environmental inspector. Jack's eyes met hers, something like respect flickering in their depths. No, he wasn't. He was something more dangerous, a witness who couldn't be bought. He worked for the railway but understood what the mining runoff was doing. He took measurements, kept records, collaborated with others who were concerned. Others, like William Marshall. Jack's sandwich paused halfway to his mouth. The name hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. After a measured silence, he set his food down and sighed, a sound containing decades of carefully maintained secrets. You found something in the dining car, not a question, but a resignation. Sarah nodded, not bothering to deny it. Are you him, William Marshall? The laugh that escaped Jack held no humor. No, William was my brother. He died in that equipment failure that wasn't. I was Jack Marshall then, changed my name after safer that way. Sarah processed this revelation, pieces clicking into place. And my father, he survived the incident, barely. He was in the locomotive thrown clear during the derailment. William was in the observation car with the documents. Jack's voice grew distant. They called it an accident, but someone had tampered with the brake lines. We couldn't prove it, and without Williams' testimony and the physical evidence, the case collapsed. Your father was advised to drop it or face similar consequences. So he gave up. Sarah couldn't reconcile this with her image of Robert Reynolds, however complicated that image might be. Jack shook his head slowly. He went quiet strategic. Bought these cars years later when no one wanted them. Kept searching for duplicates of Williams' evidence. The mining company had disbanded by then, but the executives formed new ventures, built new lives on the fortune they'd made. He believed the truth would eventually surface. And now it has. Sarah gestured toward her backpack. I found Williams' affidavit, the original test results, everything needed to prove what happened. For what purpose? Jack's expression hardened. The statute of limitations expired decades ago. The principal figures are mostly dead. The damaged streams have long since been diverted or dried up. What justice could possibly come from this? His dismissal stung more than Sarah expected. Maybe it's not about justice for the past, but protection for the future. These documents prove a pattern of corporate negligence and cover-up. If similar practices are continuing, that's not your fight. Jack stood abruptly, gathering his tools. You came here to rebuild these cars, maybe sell them for profit, not to chase ghosts. Sarah felt anger rise, surprising in its intensity. So my father wasted decades on this. On preserving evidence no one will ever use. Jack's expression softened slightly. Your father wasn't preserving evidence. He was preserving this place, these cars, this land, creating something lasting from tragedy, something he hoped you'd value someday. The conversation ended there, Jack returning to work with redoubled focus. Sarah joined him mechanically, her mind processing revelations that transformed her understanding of her inheritance. These train cars weren't just abandoned relics her father had impulsively purchased. They were artifacts from a pivotal moment in his life, preserved through decades of careful planning. As the day progressed, Sarah's phone rang, an unexpected intrusion of technology in their isolated workspace. The screen displayed Walter Monroe, the attorney she'd nearly forgotten in the whirlwind of recent events. Walter's formal tone contrasted sharply with their rustic surroundings as he inquired about her progress with the property. Sarah gave non-committal answers until he mentioned the real purpose of his call. Mayor Jenkins had contacted his office with concerns about Sarah's occupancy of the train cars. According to Jenkins, the property existed in a legal gray area, technically on national forest land, through a special use arrangement that might not transfer with ownership. Walter had reviewed the original deed and found troubling discrepancies. The situation required immediate attention if Sarah wished to maintain her claim. Sarah ended the call with promises to visit Walter's office in town, a cold weight settling in her stomach. She relayed the conversation to Jack, who nodded grimly, unsurprised. Jenkins has been trying to access this land for years. His family owned the mining company that operated here. Different name now, but same interests. The mayor's office gives him leverage over zoning permits, access rights. Jack gestured toward the valley. This whole area is slated for economic development, luxury vacation homes, a ski resort, golf courses. Your train doesn't fit the aesthetic. The timing seems suspiciously convenient, just as Sarah had discovered potentially damaging historical evidence. Legal challenges to her ownership emerged. She couldn't prove connection, but instinct suggested the issues were related. That evening, after Jack departed, Sarah sat on the edge of the plateau, watching sunset paint the valley in amber hues. The train cars behind her represented more than shelter. Now they were physical links to a history someone wanted, buried connections to her father she was only beginning to understand. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with rushing water, screeching brakes, and falling. She woke before dawn, restless and resolute. Whatever forces aligned against her, she wouldn't surrender this inheritance without understanding its full significance. Sarah arrived at Walter's office as soon as it opened the manila envelope secure in her backpack. The small law practice occupied a converted Victorian home on Ridge Valley's Main Street, its interior maintaining period details while accommodating modern necessities. Walter greeted her with practiced cordiality, his 70-something frame still carrying the straight-back posture of a career legal professional. His explanation of the property issues confirmed Jack's assessment. Mayor Jenkins had identified a technicality in the land use agreement that might invalidate Sarah's ownership. The original arrangement allowed the railway to maintain tracks and structures on national forest land, through a special use permit. When the railway folded, that permit should have terminated. Your father's purchase of the train cars didn't necessarily include rights to the land beneath them. Sarah processed this information, suspicion growing. And Mayor Jenkins is just now discovering this decades later. Walter's expression remained professionally neutral, but something in his eyes suggested personal concern. Development plans for the valley have accelerated recently. Harrington Estates submitted proposals for a major resort complex that would transform the region. The train cars sit on a particularly desirable overlook. The name registered immediately Harrington connected to the original mining operation, now rebranded as a luxury development company. The corporate evolution Jack had described was real and active, still seeking profit from the same land they'd once exploited. Sarah made a calculated decision. Rather than immediately revealing the documents, she asked Walter about his history with her father. The attorney's professional demeanor softened slightly as he described a relationship spanning decades built initially on legal necessity, but evolving into mutual respect. Robert consulted me about purchasing those train cars when everyone thought it was foolishness. I helped navigate the bankruptcy proceedings, structure the purchase to protect his interests. Walter's gaze turned reflective. He was a careful man, your father. Methodical in his planning, especially where you were concerned. Sarah seized the opening. Did he ever mention environmental concerns about the mining operations? Or an incident involving William Marshall Walter's reaction? A slight stiffening of posture, a quickly masked flash of recognition, confirmed he knew more than he'd initially revealed. His response came carefully measured. Your father entrusted certain information to me under attorney-client privilege. While his death technically releases me from that obligation, ethical considerations remain. He's protecting himself, Sarah realized, testing where my loyalties lie before committing. She withdrew the envelope from her backpack and placed it on the desk between them. I found these in a hidden compartment on the train. I believe they're what my father wanted me to discover. Walter examined the documents with practiced efficiency, his expression revealing nothing until he reached William Marshall's affidavit. When he looked up, decades of professional neutrality had fallen away, revealing genuine concern. You understand the implications of possessing these materials. Sarah nodded, though in truth she was still processing those implications herself. Will they help secure my claim to the property? Walter considered this attorney's mind calculating possibilities. Perhaps indirectly, they establish historical significance that might support preservation efforts. More importantly, they reveal potential motives behind current challenges to your ownership. He closed the folder deliberately. Let me research options. In the meantime, continue your renovation work. Establish clear occupancy. Document all improvements. Sarah left Walter's office with renewed purpose, stopping at the hardware store to purchase additional supplies. Benjamin Porter, the owner, was more forthcoming than previous visits, perhaps sensing her deepening connection to the community. Jenkins has been in here asking questions about your project. What materials you're buying, how permanent it looks. Benjamin's expression suggested disapproval of the mayor's interest. Told him customer purchases are confidential information, but thought you should know you've got attention. This confirmation of monitoring heightened Sarah's awareness as she walked through town. Previously neutral glances from locals now felt weighted with assessment, some supportive, others suspicious. Ridge Valley was taking sides regarding the train lady, with battle lines drawn around long-established alliances and grievances she barely understood. At Frank's Cafe, where she arrived for her scheduled shift, the atmosphere held similar undercurrents. Frank himself seemed gruffer than usual, his instructions clipped as he assigned her to register duty rather than her usual table service. The change positioned her front and center for town observation, whether intentionally or not. Midway through her shift, the cafe door opened to admit a man whose tailored casual wear immediately marked him as an outsider. Expensively disheveled in the manner of urban professionals performing countryside, he carried himself with the confidence of entitlement. Every head turned as he approached the counter, recognition rippling through the locals. James Harrington III introduced himself with practiced charm, extending manicured hands across the counter. His smile never reached calculating eyes that assessed her with unsettling precision. She'd encountered his type in countless development meetings, old money masquerading as meritocracy power, dressed in approachable affability. I understand you're the new owner of the Highland Line cars. What a fascinating project. Historic preservation in its most authentic form. Harrington's voice carried just enough volume to ensure the entire cafe overheard. I'd love to discuss how your renovation might complement our valley development plans. The conversation that followed resembled a chess match moves and counter moves disguised as casual interest. Harrington probed Ball for information about Sarah's intentions, timeline, and financial situation, while revealing nothing substantive about his own plans. Sarah maintained noncommittal pleasantness, keenly aware of eavesdropping patrons. When her shift ended, Harrington suggested continuing their conversation over dinner in the neighboring town where the cuisine offers more variety. Sarah declined politely, citing renovation commitments. His smile tightened imperceptibly before he placed a business card on the counter. When you're ready to discuss the future seriously, call me. We see tremendous potential in integrating authentic historical elements into our Appalachian experience. His parting words carried just enough emphasis to transform authentic historical elements from appreciation to appropriation. Sarah pocketed the card, recognizing the interaction as the opening move in a longer game. Harrington wanted something likely her land and would return with escalating pressure tactics when charm proved insufficient. Back at the train, Sarah found Jack had continued working in her absence, completing the passenger car floor reinforcement they'd begun together. His presence felt different now that she understood his connection to the property's history. Not just a helpful retiree, but a man with deep personal stakes in the train's preservation. She shared her encounters with Walter and Harrington, watching Jack's expression darken progressively. By the time she finished, his weathered hands had clenched into fists, knuckles white with suppressed emotion. History repeats itself. Same family, different generation, same disregard for anything but profit. Jack paced the length of the passenger car, agitation visible in every movement. First they poison the land, then they want to build playgrounds for the wealthy on top of the damage. And anyone standing in their way becomes an obstacle to be removed. The intensity of his reaction startled Sarah. Do you think they'd actually try to harm me? Jack stopped pacing, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculated. They operate through proxies now. Lawyers, zoning boards, building inspectors. They'll find regulations you've violated, create problems with access rights, pressure the town council to declare the site unsafe. He gestured toward the renovations. We need to accelerate our timeline. Make this place undeniably habitable, document everything, create witnesses to your occupancy and improvements. Our timeline. Sarah noted the shift from assistance to partnership with mixed emotions. Jack's help had proven invaluable, but his personal vendetta complicated her already uncertain situation. Yet his expertise and knowledge of local dynamics might make the difference between keeping or losing her inheritance. The next 2 weeks unfolded with relentless purpose. Sarah divided her time between cafe shifts, research at the town library, consultations with Walter, and intensive renovation work. Jack arrived daily, often with additional materials salvaged from unspecified sources, his decades of construction experience transforming theoretical plans into practical progress. Together, they established systems that transformed the train cars from mere shelter to functional living space. A sophisticated rainwater collection network channeled mountain precipitation through filters into storage tanks. Solar panels purchased at considerable expense from Sarah's dwindling funds provided limited but reliable electricity. A composting toilet system addressed waste management with surprising efficiency. Walls received insulation extracted from abandoned buildings in the valley, floors gained carpet remnants donated by sympathetic locals. Windows acquired salvaged glass cut to size by Benjamin's hardware store. The passenger car emerged as primary living space, its row seating removed to create an open floor plan divided into practical zones. The dining car maintained its original function with restored banquettes and tables, its panoramic windows offering breathtaking views that changed with the shifting mountain light. The freight car transformed into workshop and storage, housing tools and materials for ongoing projects. Throughout this intensive work period, Sarah's understanding of her father deepened through his notebooks and traces left in the construction. Robert Reynolds had planned meticulously, anticipating challenges she encountered and providing solutions through detailed notes. His engineering mind had accounted for water pressure differentials, load-bearing requirements, seasonal temperature variations, creating blueprints for a home disguised as abandoned train cars. What emerged wasn't merely habitable but thoughtfully designed, blending historical preservation with practical modernization. Sarah found herself applying architectural knowledge in ways her corporate career had never allowed, solving complex problems with limited resources, adapting 19th century structures to 21st century needs without compromising their essential character. The transformation extended beyond physical space to Sarah herself. Her body grew stronger, hands calloused, skin tanned from outdoor work. City-cultivated fastidiousness gave way to practical functionality, conservation of water, appreciation for simple systems, awareness of natural rhythms. Chicago's constant noise and light pollution faded from memory, replaced by mountain silence, punctuated by wind through pines, distant bird calls, the occasional echo of wildlife moving through underbrush. As physical changes accumulated, so too did social connections. Frank's gruffness mellowed into reluctant respect when Sarah's reliability and work ethic proved consistent. Benjamin began setting aside salvageable materials he thought might suit her project. Margaret visited regularly, sometimes bringing homemade preserves or practical advice about mountain weather patterns. Most significantly, children began appearing first. Emily Johnson, Benjamin's 12-year-old granddaughter, arriving with hesitant curiosity that quickly blossomed into enthusiastic assistance. She brought friends who viewed the train renovation as real-life adventure, their energy and uninhibited questions bringing unexpected lightness to the project. Sarah found herself hosting impromptu history lessons about railroad engineering, enjoying their unfiltered amazement at details adults overlooked. Not all community interactions proved positive. Mayor Jenkins orchestrated a safety inspection that resulted in a list of alleged violations: insufficient fire egress, unpermitted structural modifications, unauthorized occupation of Forest Service land. The document, delivered by an apologetic deputy sheriff, established a 30-day deadline for compliance or evacuation. Walter filed immediate counter-arguments, buying time through procedural challenges. His legal strategy focused on establishing historical significance while researching precedents for grandfathered occupancy rights. Meanwhile, Sarah documented every improvement, creating before and after photographs, maintaining detailed logs of work completed, and collecting statements from locals who had witnessed the transformation. Pressure mounted when Sarah's cafe hours were suddenly reduced, Frank apologetically citing seasonal adjustments that seemed suspiciously coincidental with her conflict against town leadership. The financial impact threatened her ability to purchase necessary materials just as the renovation reached critical stages. Jack responded by introducing Sarah to other dissatisfied locals, small business owners concerned about Harrington's development plans, environmental advocates worried about watershed impacts, elderly residents whose families had occupied the valley for generations. A loose coalition formed around shared interests, with the train renovation symbolizing broader resistance to outside exploitation. Through these connections, Sarah secured part-time design work, creating promotional materials for local businesses. The income proved modest but sufficient to maintain momentum on essential improvements. More importantly, each new professional relationship strengthened her community integration, transforming her from isolated outsider to connected stakeholder. James Harrington returned as predicted, this time accompanied by architectural renderings of Appalachian Heights Resort, a sprawling luxury development encompassing most of the valley. He arrived at the train unannounced, his polished SUV incongruous against the rustic setting. Sarah received him on the observation deck she'd constructed alongside the dining car, offering a strategic view of both her renovations and the valley his company planned to transform. Their conversation began with practiced pleasantries that quickly gave way to business. Harrington expressed genuine admiration for her renovation work, while suggesting the location's remoteness presented insurmountable logistical challenges for long-term viability. His proposed solution, purchasing her property at generous valuation and incorporating the renovated train cars into the resort's authentic Appalachian experience area, offered financial relief while preserving her artistic vision. The initial offer, $50,000, exceeded the property's technical market value, but grossly undervalued both the improvements and the train's historical significance. When Sarah didn't immediately accept, Harrington doubled the offer, while adding thinly veiled warnings about the difficulty of maintaining isolated properties without community support. Sarah recognized the implicit threat. The renovated train had become more than property; it represented connection to her father's newly formed community bonds, an emerging purpose after career devastation. Yet practical concerns remained valid. Winter would bring harsh conditions. Her legal claim remained precarious, and financial stability had not yet solidified. Harrington left his revised offer open for 1 week, departing with confidence that circumstances would force her acceptance. The rumble of his vehicle faded into mountain silence, leaving Sarah alone with conflicting pragmatism and principle. That evening, as sunset painted the observation deck in gold and amber, Sarah reopened her father's most personal notebook, seeking guidance from his experiences. Among technical specifications and material lists, occasional reflections revealed his deeper purpose. The beauty of these cars isn't what they were, but what they could become. Not preserved as museum pieces, but reborn as living space history breathing alongside innovation. Sarah would understand this balance. It's how she approaches her designs, though she doesn't realize I've followed her career quietly, proudly. The words blurred as unexpected tears formed. Her father had seen her professional work, recognized her talents, felt pride she'd never known. All while maintaining distance she'd interpreted as disinterest. The complexity of their relationship, connection disguised as separation, mirrored the train itself, abandoned, yet preserved, forgotten, yet meticulously maintained. Sarah closed the notebook with newfound resolution. She wouldn't sell to Harrington. Whatever challenges arose, she would face them with the same determination that had brought her this far. Her father had created this legacy, believing she would someday value it. She wouldn't dishonor that faith for quick financial relief or easy resolution. The decision made, Sarah turned her attention to immediate concerns, completing essential winterization before seasonal temperature drops, securing proper documentation of her occupancy rights, and building sufficient community alliances to withstand escalating pressure. The following morning brought unexpected complications. Sarah arrived at Walter's office for scheduled consultation to find the elderly attorney, ashen-faced, his usual composure visibly shaken. He closed the office door before speaking, voice lowered despite their privacy. I've been approached by Harrington's attorneys with a professional proposition. Substantial retainer to join their legal team focusing specifically on development rights and land acquisition. The offer arrived immediately after I filed our historical preservation application. Sarah understood immediately. They're trying to create conflict of interest, force you to withdraw from representing me. Walter nodded grimly. It's more than that. They've researched my involvement with your father's original purchase, implied potential ethical violations in how the transaction was structured. Their message was clear: drop your representation or face possible disbarment proceedings. The threat's effectiveness showed in Walter's demeanor. Near retirement age, his professional reputation represented lifetime achievement. Fighting protracted legal battles against a well-funded corporation presented risks disproportionate to representing one client with limited resources. Sarah released him from obligation without resentment. Walter provided referrals to attorneys in neighboring counties, though his expression suggested limited optimism about finding representation willing to challenge Harrington's interests. The development confirmed Jack's warnings about escalation tactics. Rather than direct confrontation, Harrington operated through systemic pressure, removing support structures, creating isolation, establishing inevitability. The strategy's effectiveness lay in its incremental nature, each individual action seemingly reasonable, while their cumulative impact proved overwhelming. Sarah returned to the train, determined to accelerate winterization efforts. Jack arrived shortly after, bringing unsettling news. County records showing access road maintenance schedules had been updated, removing the Forest Service road, leading to the train from regular clearing rotations. When winter snow arrived, the road would likely become impassable for conventional vehicles. We need to establish alternative access. Jack unfolded topographical maps showing the surrounding terrain. The old maintenance trail along the railbed provides more direct approach from the East Valley. Steeper grade, but more protected from drifting. With minimal clearing and some gravel reinforcement, it could serve as emergency route. The project represented significant labor and expense resources already stretched thin by essential renovations. Sarah calculated remaining funds against projected needs, finding insufficient margins for both requirements. Choices loomed: prioritize interior comfort against harsh weather or ensure access during inevitable storms. Before decisions could be finalized, Sarah's phone rang. Frank from the cafe, his gruff voice uncharacteristically hesitant. He explained that health inspectors had visited unexpectedly, citing anonymous complaints about food handling procedures. While no actual violations were found, the scrutiny had rattled him. With sincere regret that seemed genuine, despite its convenience, he eliminated all part-time positions until the situation stabilizes. Sarah ended the call with practiced professionalism that dissolved the moment connection terminated. The job loss eliminated her primary income source, compromising not just renovation plans, but basic necessities. The coordination with other pressure tactics seemed obvious. Harrington systematically removing options until accepting his offer became the only viable choice. Jack's weathered face reflected understanding without pity. Been watching this playbook for decades. First they isolate, then they suffocate, finally they eliminate. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, the gesture awkward but sincere. But they've miscalculated something important. Sarah looked up momentarily, forgetting frustration in response to his certainty. What's that? You're not alone this time. Jack's expression hardened with resolve born from decades-old wounds. Your father faced them without community support, everyone too afraid of losing mining jobs to stand against corruption. The company controlled everything then. But their power has fragmented over time, their tactics grown obvious to more people. His gaze swept across the valley. You've made connections they didn't anticipate. People who remember the company's history, who see the same patterns emerging again. Though comforting in theory, concrete reality remained challenging. Without income, Sarah's renovation timeline faced critical delays. Without legal representation, her ownership claims remained vulnerable. Without maintained access roads, winter isolation posed genuine safety concerns. As these thoughts circled, movement on the approaching trail caught her attention. A procession of pickup trucks navigated the Forest Service road, parking in available clearings near the train. Doors opened to reveal familiar faces: Benjamin from the hardware store, Margaret with her woven baskets, Pastor Mark Wilson from the church Sarah had never attended, and several others she recognized from town interactions. Benjamin approached first expression, suggesting embarrassment beneath determination. Heard about Frank letting you go. Town's talking about it and other things happening lately. Not everyone supports Jenkins and his developer friends. Some of us remember how this played out before. Behind him, others nodded agreement. Margaret stepped forward, her weathered face reflecting generations of mountain resilience. We brought supplies and willing hands. Time for a proper work party before winter sets in. The unexpected support brought tears. Sarah quickly blinked away. The generosity contradicted everything Harrington's isolation strategy assumed about community dynamics. These weren't wealthy people or environmental activists, just locals recognizing familiar patterns of exploitation, choosing resistance despite personal risk. What followed transformed both the train and Sarah's understanding of mountain community. Throughout the weekend, volunteers rotated through based on availability and skills. Benjamin coordinated material distribution, Margaret organized meals. Pastor Mark surprisingly demonstrated expert carpentry skills learned through decades of church maintenance. Children darted between adults, delivering tools and messages, their energy infectious. Teenagers initially brought by parents discovered genuine interest in construction techniques. Elderly residents unable to participate physically contributed through stories about the train's historical operations in the valley's complex past. By Sunday evening, the transformation amazed even Jack's experienced assessment. The passenger car received comprehensive weatherproofing, its restored wood stove promising warmth through deepest winter. The access road gained gravel reinforcement at critical points, with drainage channels positioned to prevent snowmelt erosion. Food storage expanded to accommodate preservation of fall harvests. Local families contributed. More significant than physical improvements was the psychological shift. Sarah had arrived in Ridge Valley seeing only personal sanctuary. The community work party revealed broader significance. Her stand against corporate development represented many local interests, making the train renovation symbolic beyond personal dwelling. As volunteers departed with promises of continued support, Sarah found herself standing beside Jack on the observation deck, watching taillights disappear into gathering dusk. The mountain air carried first hints of autumn crispness, a reminder of approaching seasonal challenges. Sometimes history offers second chances. Jack's voice held decades of perspective as he surveyed the results of collaborative effort. What happened 40 years ago fractured this community. those who stood with the mining company against those who stood for the land. Some wounds never fully healed, but this feels like possibility again. Sarah considered his words, understanding connections between past and present with new clarity. The train cars her father preserved weren't just potential dwelling space, but physical reminders of corporate accountability's importance. His persistence in maintaining them represented faith that truth eventually emerges, that exploitation ultimately fails against collective resistance. As darkness settled over the mountain, Sarah made two decisions that would shape everything that followed. First, she would formalize the train's historical documentation, creating comprehensive records preserving both its railroad significance and its connection to environmental advocacy. Second, she would develop an alternative proposal to Harrington's development plan, one honoring the valley's character while providing sustainable economic opportunities for local residents. Both projects exceeded her individual capacity, requiring community involvement, professional assistance, and resources beyond her limited means. Yet the weekend's unexpected support suggested previously invisible possibilities. If her father had maintained faith through decades of solitary effort, she could certainly attempt collective resistance against forces that once seemed insurmountable. That night, Sarah slept in a train car that felt increasingly like home, warmed by a wood stove, installed by neighbors she hadn't known 2 months prior, surrounded by improvements representing communal rather than individual effort. Outside, mountain winds whispered through pine branches, carrying memories of past struggles alongside promises of challenges yet to come. The true inheritance had finally revealed itself, not abandoned train cars or disputed land, but the opportunity to complete unfinished business spanning generations. Her father had preserved physical evidence. Sarah would transform it into living testimony that some things transcend profitability, that communities can reclaim determination of their futures, that corruption eventually faces accountability. The battle had only begun. Harrington's resources dwarfed their collective capacity, Jenkins controlled local governance, and winter approached with implacable certainty. Yet for the first time since losing her Chicago life, Sarah felt something beyond determination or even purpose. She felt hope. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the mountainside into a crystalline landscape that sparkled under rare sunlight and glowed with ethereal blue during overcast days. Sarah stood on the observation deck, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air, struck by beauty that city winters had never offered. The train cars, now insulated and sealed against the elements, stood as dark anchors in the whiteness, improbable shelter that increasingly felt like destiny rather than accident. Inside, the passenger car had evolved from mere living space to genuine home. Salvaged wood paneling replaced damaged wall sections, restored to match original detailing. Carpet remnants softened the reinforced floor layered with hand-woven rugs donated by Margaret. The wood stove, a cast-iron behemoth Jack had found in an abandoned hunting cabin, radiated steady heat that maintained comfortable temperatures despite plummeting external conditions. The dining car functioned as both kitchen and workspace, its large windows offering panoramic views that transformed daily tasks into near spiritual experiences. Sarah had restored several booth seats, creating conversation nooks that hosted increasing numbers of visitors. The counter area held a 2-burner propane stove, water storage connected to the rainwater collection system, and shelves stocked with preserved foods contributed by community members. Most transformed was the freight car, now divided between workshop and community space. Tools hung on organized wall mounts, materials stored in labeled containers, project plans displayed on reclaimed corkboard. The area had become collaborative headquarters where locals gathered to develop alternatives to Harrington's development plans. This evolution from personal dwelling to community center had occurred, gradually accelerating after the work party weekend. Visitors initially arrived with practical offerings, food materials, labor, but increasingly came seeking involvement in what had become known locally as the Highland Project. Sarah's architectural background proved unexpectedly valuable as she facilitated development of a community-centered alternative to Harrington's resort plans. Using her father's detailed land surveys as foundation, she incorporated local knowledge about seasonal water flow patterns, historic sites, wildlife migration routes, and sustainable forestry practices. The resulting proposal emphasized limited-impact tourism educational opportunities, highlighting Appalachian culture and small-scale businesses owned by Valley residents. The contrast with Harrington's vision could not have been starker. Where his renderings showed massive lodge buildings dominating ridgelines, theirs preserved natural contours. His golf courses and swimming pools, requiring chemical treatments, were replaced with hiking trails and natural swimming areas in existing river pools. His exclusive high-end boutiques became marketplace spaces for local artisans and food producers. As the alternative plan developed, so did Sarah's connection to Ridge Valley's complex social ecosystem. She discovered the community wasn't divided simply between development supporters and opponents. Many residents recognized economic opportunities in tourism, but feared displacement and environmental degradation. Others harbored generational distrust of outside corporations based on historical exploitation. Some balanced financial pressures against preservation values, seeing Harrington's promises through both hope and skepticism. These nuances informed Sarah's approach to building coalition. Rather than positioning the train as symbolic opposition, she emphasized its potential as case study for harmonious development, historical preservation, complementing natural beauty, minimal footprint, supporting sustainable living, collaborative space, fostering community ownership. The strategy gained traction particularly among long-established families with memories of mining-era promises that delivered prosperity for few while extracting resources from many. Young people previously planning exodus due to limited opportunities expressed renewed interest in heritage tourism possibilities. Even some business owners initially supportive of Harrington's plan began questioning whether corporate development would truly benefit local enterprises. Not everyone welcomed this shift. Mayor Jenkins called an emergency town council meeting focused on safety concerns regarding unauthorized dwellings on Forest Service land. The session, strategically scheduled during daytime working hours, featured testimony from county inspectors citing numerous code violations at the train site. Despite several community members attending to speak in support, the council voted 4-1 to issue a formal eviction notice effective 30 days from delivery. The notice arrived via certified mail the following day, its official language transforming theoretical threat into concrete deadline. Sarah now faced not just winter's physical challenges, but legal proceedings backed by municipal authority. Her opponents had escalated from pressure tactics to direct action, forcing confrontation she'd hoped to avoid through community support and alternative proposals. Jack arrived minutes after Sarah signed in for the document, his weather-lined face registering immediate understanding upon seeing the envelope. We need legal counsel, not just consultation, but committed representation. The official action changes everything. Sarah handed him the notice, frustration evident in her movements. Walter provided referrals, but 3 attorneys have already declined after conflicts of interest mysteriously developed. The 4th hasn't returned calls. Harrington's reach extends beyond Ridge Valley. Jack studied the document with practiced attention, years of construction disputes having educated him in legal terminology. But county jurisdiction isn't unlimited. There are higher authorities and alternative venues. He made several calls from Sarah's phone, speaking in the formal tones he adopted for official interactions rather than his usual mountain cadence. After the 3rd conversation, he turned to Sarah with cautious optimism. Lisa Chen, environmental law specialist from Johnson City, previously tangled with Harrington's subsidiaries over watershed protections in Carlson County, willing to consult tomorrow morning. The attorney arrived precisely at the appointed time, her hybrid SUV navigating the partially cleared access road with determined efficiency. Lisa Chen projected focused energy that contrasted with Walter's deliberate approach, mid-40s meticulously professional, in outdoor-appropriate business attire, carrying both leather portfolio and tablet equipped with satellite internet capability. Her assessment began with thorough documentation of the train renovation, photographing improvements, while asking precise questions about materials, techniques, and timing. She examined Sarah's ownership paperwork, Walter's notes, and the historical documents found in the dining car wall panel. Her expression remained neutral throughout, offering neither false encouragement nor premature discouragement. Only after complete information gathering did she deliver her analysis, her words carefully chosen yet direct. You're facing coordinated opposition from multiple sources, but the situation isn't hopeless. The eviction notice contains procedural errors. We can challenge, though, that's temporary delay rather than solution. The historical documentation offers more promising avenues, potential National Register eligibility that would supersede local zoning authority. She outlined a multi-pronged strategy combining procedural challenges to gain time historical preservation filings to establish protection and potential environmental review requests based on William Marshall's documentation of previous contamination. The approach wouldn't guarantee victory, but would extend the timeline while establishing legitimate barriers to immediate eviction. Most critically, she suggested engaging media attention, not local outlets, susceptible to pressure, but regional environmental journalists likely interested in both historical contamination and contemporary development controversies. Public scrutiny could constrain Harrington's more aggressive tactics while highlighting community-based alternatives. Lisa's proposed strategy came with substantial financial requirements, filing fees, research costs, potential court appearances. Sarah's remaining savings wouldn't cover a fraction of anticipated expenses, creating apparent impasse until Jack intervened with unexpected revelation. "I've been saving for decades, planning to retire somewhere warm. Florida, maybe." Jack's expression suggested mild embarrassment at this admission. "Never found anywhere worth going. Might as well put those funds towards something meaningful here." His offer financial backing for legal proceedings transformed theoretical strategy into actionable plan. Lisa agreed to structured payment arrangements. Jack committed to initial retainer, and Sarah secured representation against forces previously seeming insurmountable. This significant victory carried bittersweet undertones. Jack's decades of solitary saving represented lost opportunities for enjoyment, travel, comfort. That he would commit these resources to continuing his brother's unfinished business spoke to both devotion and regret that had shaped his existence since the fateful accident. As Lisa departed with documents for immediate filing, snow began falling again, heavy flakes that reduced visibility and reinforced the mountain's isolation. Sarah watched Jack staring into the whiteness, his profile etched with weathered determination. For the first time, she fully comprehended the weight he had carried across decades: survivor's guilt, unfulfilled justice, solitary vigilance. "The train isn't just your father's legacy or my brother's evidence. It's physical proof that some things can't be buried forever, no matter how much power and money get thrown at covering them up." Jack's voice emerged soft, yet unyielding. "Some truths refuse to stay hidden. They wait for the right moment, the right person to bring them into light again." His words crystallized Sarah's evolving understanding of her inheritance's significance. Her father hadn't preserved these train cars merely for dwelling space or historical interest. He'd maintained them as vessels containing truth that conventional systems had suppressed physical manifestations of resistance against institutional corruption. The realization deepened her commitment beyond personal shelter or community alternative planning. Whatever happened next, Sarah would ensure William Marshall's evidence and Robert Reynolds's preservation efforts served their intended purpose, revealing environmental crimes and corporate cover-ups that had damaged both land and community. Lisa's legal strategy began yielding results within days. Her challenge to procedural errors in the eviction notice won temporary restraining order, preventing enforcement until proper hearing. Simultaneously, her emergency filing for historical designation review triggered mandatory waiting period before any alteration to potentially significant structures. These initial victories provided breathing space, but accelerated counter-responses. Harrington Estates filed objections challenging historical significance claims, submitted comprehensive documentation supporting development approvals, and mobilized economic arguments, emphasizing job creation and tax revenue enhancement. The corporation's legal team, 5 attorneys, supported by paralegals and researchers, dwarfed Lisa's solo practice resources despite Jack's financial support. Most concerning development came when Lisa discovered the regional office reviewing historical designation application had recently hired former Harrington executive as special consultant. The connection created potential conflict requiring disclosure and recusal, but also threatened application's impartial consideration. Sarah's immediate frustration at this revelation yielded to strategic adjustment. If institutional processes were vulnerable to influence, alternative approaches became necessary. Following Lisa's earlier suggestion about media engagement, Sarah contacted environmental journalists covering Appalachian development controversies. The response exceeded expectations. 3 reporters expressed immediate interest, particularly when Sarah mentioned documented evidence of historical contamination potentially relevant to current development plans. The first arrived within days. Michaela Williams from the Regional Environmental News Service, whose reputation for thorough investigation had earned industry recognition. Michaela spent hours examining William Marshall's evidence, photographing documents, while recording Sarah's explanation of their discovery. She interviewed Jack about the original incident railway closure and decades of corporate evolution disguising continuing ownership connections. Most significantly, she collected water and soil samples from locations matching Williams' original testing sites, intending independent laboratory analysis for comparison with historical data. Before departing, Michaela offered cautious encouragement. If current testing confirms continued contamination matching historical patterns, this becomes more than preservation dispute. Environmental compliance requirements would supersede development approvals, triggering comprehensive review that could delay Harrington's plans indefinitely. The potential implications energized community supporters while intensifying opposition pressure. Vehicles with tinted windows began appearing near the access road, occupants photographing visitors arriving at the train. Sarah received anonymous calls alternating between silence and muffled threats. Someone tampered with the water collection system overnight, contaminating stored supplies with motor oil that could have caused illness if Sarah hadn't noticed unusual odor before consumption. These intimidation attempts strengthened rather than diminished community resolve. Benjamin installed security cameras covering approach routes. Pastor Mark organized volunteer patrols maintaining 24-hour presence. Margaret coordinated communication system using ham radio equipment when cell service experienced mysterious technical difficulties. Most unexpected support came from younger residents who transformed the train's social media presence from casual documentation to coordinated advocacy. Emily Johnson, Benjamin's granddaughter, applied school media production skills to create compelling video narratives featuring community members sharing both historical knowledge and future hopes. These authentic stories contrasted powerfully with Harrington's glossy promotional materials, accumulating significant regional attention through organic sharing networks. Winter deepened as December progressed, mountain weather alternating between crystalline brilliance and threatening storms. The harshest blizzard, 3 days of howling winds, driving horizontal snow, tested the train's renovations under extreme conditions. Sarah monitored the wood stove, constantly measured remaining fuel supplies, and calculated consumption rates against expected storm duration. During brief breaks in the weather, Jack snowshoed in with additional firewood and news from town. Harrington representatives had called emergency council meeting seeking expedited development approvals before environmental testing could impact planning. Jenkins initially supported acceleration, but faced unexpected resistance from 2 council members previously reliable in development matters. The shifting political dynamic reflected growing community sentiment. As Harrington's pressure tactics became increasingly obvious, residents recognized familiar patterns from mining-era exploitation. Stories resurged about historical damages, contaminated wells never properly addressed, subsidence issues affecting homes near extraction sites, promised remediation that never materialized once resources had been depleted. Sarah's alternative development proposal gained traction as printed copies circulated through community networks. Local business owners recognized potential benefits from measured tourism growth rather than corporate monopolization. Craftspeople appreciated marketplace opportunities, honoring traditional skills. Outdoor enthusiasts valued trail networks, connecting historical sites while preserving natural features. As January arrived, multiple developments converged toward inevitable confrontation. Michaela Williams published initial investigation results, confirming soil and water contamination, matching historical patterns documented in William Marshall's evidence. Lisa Chen secured hearing date for both historical designation application and challenge to eviction proceedings. Harrington scheduled public presentation of enhanced development plans, supposedly addressing community concerns while maintaining profit metrics. The simultaneous timing created perfect narrative convergence, corporate interests pushing rapid approval, while evidence of past misconduct and present contamination emerged alongside community-generated alternatives. Media attention expanded beyond environmental outlets to regional news organizations, attracted by David versus Goliath framing and corporate accountability questions. Harrington responded with characteristic calculation, replacing brute force tactics with sophisticated perception management. His revised proposal incorporated superficial elements from the community alternative nature trails, though limited to resort guests, local craft demonstrations as entertainment amenities. Historical displays sanitized of environmental controversy. The adjustments offered appearance of compromise while maintaining fundamental extraction of value from local resources. Most significantly, Harrington announced establishment of Community Benefit Fund, providing grants for municipal improvements, scholarship programs, and healthcare initiatives. The substantial financial commitment, $500,000 annually for 10 years, presented tempting incentive for economically challenged region. Initial public reaction suggested effective strategy, with social media comments praising corporate citizenship and questioning opposition motives. Sarah recognized the maneuver's effectiveness. Abstract environmental concerns and historical preservation arguments struggled against concrete financial benefits in community-facing economic challenges. The strategy threatened to divide coalitions she'd carefully cultivated, particularly among residents balancing principle against practical needs. The critical turning point arrived unexpectedly through Emily Johnson's ongoing video documentation. Her interview with Edward Marshall, Jack's cousin, who'd remained in Ridge Valley while Jack departed after the railway incident, revealed previously undisclosed health impacts from historical contamination. Edward described childhood leukemia cluster affecting multiple families near contaminated watershed, including his own daughter who died at age 6. Medical authorities had investigated but reached inconclusive results regarding causation. Mining company representatives had suggested statistical anomaly, rather than environmental factors, offering condolence payments with confidentiality agreements. Many grieving families accepted out of financial necessity. The video shared across regional networks transformed abstract environmental documentation into human tragedy. Statistical data and technical reports paled against Edward's weathered face, describing his daughter's hospital treatments, company denials, and decades without accountability. Community conversations shifted dramatically. Potential development benefits weighed against generational harm, previously minimized through institutional processes and corporate influence. Harrington Estates attempted damage control through formal statement, expressing sympathy while denying responsibility for historical operations conducted under different corporate structure. The carefully crafted legal language, clearly produced by attorneys rather than actual executives, reinforced perception of callous prioritization of liability, protection over human impact. The controversy reached crescendo as scheduled hearings approached. Harrington representatives made final attempt at resolution, approaching Sarah directly, with substantially increased purchase, offered $250,000 for immediate property transfer, with additional $100,000 donation to community foundation of her choosing. The proposal included guaranteed position as heritage consultant for resort development, effectively offering both financial security and professional rehabilitation. The proposition created genuine temptation. Sarah's financial resources had dwindled despite community support. Legal expenses mounted despite Jack's assistance, and winter isolation highlighted practical challenges of mountain living. The settlement would resolve immediate pressures while providing means to establish somewhere new, potentially with greater comfort and security. Sarah brought the offer to community meeting held in the freight car workshop space, now regularly hosting 15 to 20 people, despite winter conditions limiting access. Rather than presenting personal decision, she facilitated open discussion of implications, benefits, and concerns. The conversation revealed complex perspectives, some encouraging acceptance as practical resolution, others viewing capitulation as betrayal of principles, most acknowledging decision belonged ultimately to Sarah as property owner. Jack remained uncharacteristically silent throughout discussion, his expression unreadable, as neighbors debated. Only as conversation concluded did he request private word with Sarah, leading her to the observation deck, where snow-covered valleys stretched below them, evening light casting long shadows across untouched whiteness. My brother died believing some things matter more than money or comfort. Jack's voice emerged softer than usual, lacking typical gruffness. Your father lived by the same principle, though in quieter ways. They both understood that once you put price tag on truth, you've already lost something more valuable than whatever you're paid. His words articulated the fundamental question underlying Harrington's offer, not financial value but spiritual cost. Accepting settlement wouldn't merely transfer property. It would convert moral stand into transactional exchange. The train cars would transition from symbols of resistance to commodified attractions in corporate development, their authentic significance replaced with performative heritage display. The insight cemented Sarah's decision. She declined Harrington's offer through formal letter, copied to all involved parties, including media contacts. Her response acknowledged financial generosity while emphasizing values transcending monetary consideration: historical truth, environmental accountability, community, self-determination. The rejection eliminated remaining possibility of negotiated resolution, ensuring the scheduled town hall would become decisive confrontation. Both sides prepared extensively, Harrington assembling technical experts, economic analysts, and public relations specialists. Sarah coordinating community speakers, historical documentation, and alternative proposal presentations. The evening arrived with unexpected meteorological drama, clearing skies after days of threatening clouds. Temperature drop, creating crystalline conditions that transformed the town in almost theatrical illumination. The municipal building's parking lot filled beyond capacity, forcing attendees to park along Main Street and walk through sub-zero temperatures to reach the meeting. Inside, the ordinary council chamber had been replaced with high school gymnasium configuration to accommodate unprecedented attendance. Folding chairs arranged in rows faced raised platform where council members sat behind folding tables. Projection screens displayed corporate logos and development renderings, visual reminder of resources differential between opposing visions. Mayor Jenkins called the session to order with forced joviality that poorly masked nervous anticipation. His opening remarks emphasized procedural parameters. Each side allocated 30 minutes for initial presentation, followed by council questions, concluding with limited public comment period. The structure favored prepared corporate presentation over community participation, though Jenkins framed restrictions as necessary time management. Harrington opened with polished multimedia experience, architectural renderings, economic projections, employment statistics, and environmental mitigation plans delivered through synchronized narration and visual transitions. The presentation emphasized compatibility with local character while promising economic transformation, threading careful balance between progress and preservation themes. When corporate representatives concluded, Sarah approached the podium with simple materials, historical photographs, her father's notebooks, William Marshall's evidence, and community alternative renderings hand-drawn rather than computer-generated. The contrast established immediate visual narrative: corporate resources versus grassroots authenticity, external imposition versus internal generation. Her presentation began not with development arguments but historical context: the train car's original function, their connection to environmental documentation, their preservation through decades of corporate evolution and continued contamination. She framed current conflict not as isolated development dispute, but latest chapter in ongoing tension between extraction and stewardship, corporate profit and community well-being. As Sarah concluded initial remarks, movement at gymnasium entrance drew attention. Edward Marshall entered, accompanied by 8 adults of varying ages, each carrying framed photographs of children. They proceeded silently to platform area, forming line, facing council members, photographs held forward, showing young faces from decades past, victims of childhood cancers, whose correlation with contamination had been systematically minimized. The unplanned demonstration created powerful visual testimony, requiring no verbal explanation. Council members visibly struggled, maintaining procedural focus against emotional impact. Mayor Jenkins attempted redirecting discussion toward development specifications, but community speakers systematically connected historical context to present proposals, emphasizing pattern of corporate promises against documented outcomes. The decisive moment came unexpectedly through technical, rather than emotional avenue. Lisa Chen approached podium during question period, requesting permission to introduce new evidence directly relevant to development approval process. Despite Jenkins's reluctance, council rules required accommodation of material impacting pending decisions. Lisa presented laboratory analysis completed that afternoon, confirming contamination levels exceeding federal safety standards in multiple locations within proposed development footprint. The testing conducted by independent environmental engineering firm documented specific chemical signatures matching those identified in William Marshall's original evidence from 1975. The technical confirmation transformed historical allegations into contemporary regulatory violation, requiring mandatory remediation before any development approval could proceed. Environmental compliance requirements would necessitate comprehensive testing throughout the valley soil replacement in contaminated areas, groundwater treatment systems, and ongoing monitoring processes, potentially requiring years before construction could begin. Harrington's representatives attempted dismissing findings as a preliminary and unverified, but Lisa produced certification documentation from laboratories holding federal testing credentials. The evidence shifted deliberation from subjective valuation of competing proposals to objective regulatory compliance question that council members couldn't legally ignore regardless of development preferences. Mayor Jenkins, recognizing fundamental alteration of approval dynamics, called recess for council consultation with municipal attorney. The 20-minute break transformed into hour-long deliberation as legal implications became apparent. When council reconvened, Jenkins announced postponement of development approval consideration pending comprehensive environmental assessment of impacted areas. The announcement represented neither victory nor defeat, but process reset development, temporarily suspended eviction proceedings practically unenforceable, while environmental testing proceeded, historical preservation application continuing through evaluation pipeline. Immediate threat had subsided, replaced by extended regulatory process in which truth rather than influence might determine outcomes. As meeting adjourned, community members gathered around Sarah with expressions ranging from vindication to cautious optimism. The confrontation had transformed abstract dispute into concrete regulatory process with defined parameters and documentation requirements. Corporate resources retained advantage in protracted proceedings, but evidence-based standards created accountability framework resistant to mere influence. Jack stood slightly apart from celebration, his expression reflecting complicated emotions beyond simple satisfaction. When Sarah approached, he nodded toward Edward Marshall and the others holding photographs, now engaged in conversation with journalists, documenting their stories. Some victories don't feel triumphant. Jack's voice carried weight of decades rather than momentary relief. Those children don't come back. The damage doesn't disappear. We just hope preventing more harm counts for something in the balance. His perspective grounded Sarah's understanding of what they'd achieved, not conquest but continuation, not conclusion, but commitment to process serving truth rather than power. The train cars hadn't yielded simple resolution, but complicated responsibility, becoming vessels not just for historical evidence, but ongoing accountability. As community members departed through freshly fallen snow, Sarah remained on municipal building steps, watching their headlights trace patterns through darkness. The cold air crystallized breath into momentary clouds that dissipated into star-filled sky, visible reminder of both human impact and natural transcendence. In that moment, Sarah understood what her father had truly preserved, not just physical structures or historical evidence, but faith in eventual reconciliation between truth and consequence, between community and environment, between past damage and future possibility. The train cars embodied connection across time, linking William Marshall's documentation to contemporary testing, connecting corporate actions to community impacts, bridging her father's solitary preservation to collaborative restoration. She returned to the train that night to find it transformed yet again, this time through community gathering that had occurred without her presence. Someone had installed strings of solar-powered lights along the roof lines, their gentle illumination transforming utilitarian shelter into beacon visible from valley below. Inside the dining car contained impromptu celebration evidence, coffee cups, dessert plates, handwritten notes of encouragement. The space had completed evolution from abandoned relic to contested property to community symbol, physical manifestation of collective determination that some things remain beyond market valuation. Sarah moved through softly lit cars, touching evidence of hundreds of hours of collaborative labor, feeling connection to people she hadn't known existed 3 months earlier. Outside, mountain silence enveloped the train in crystalline stillness, interrupted only by occasional shifting of metal, adjusting to temperature changes. Sarah stood on the observation deck watching moonlight transform snow-covered valley into silver landscape stretching toward horizon. The beauty existed alongside contamination, the damage alongside recovery, the corruption alongside accountability, complexity that no single narrative could fully capture. The train would remain contested space through processes stretching into months and likely years ahead. Environmental remediation, historical designation, development alternatives. Each represented ongoing rather than resolved engagement. Sarah had inherited not destination, but journey, not an answer, but question, not conclusion, but commitment. As stars wheeled overhead in ancient patterns, Sarah understood final truth of her father's legacy. He hadn't preserved the train as finished creation, but as foundation for continuing in work. The restoration wasn't meant for completion, but participation in processes larger than individual lifetimes. Like the stars themselves, significance emerged not through momentary brightness, but consistent presence across time, bearing witness, maintaining course, illuminating darkness through collective rather than individual light. In that understanding, Sarah found peace beneath winter stars surrounded by mountains that had witnessed countless human dramas while maintaining perspective beyond temporary conflicts. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought tonight, a firm possibility of endurance, of continuity, of truth eventually emerging despite forces arranged against it. Some legacies can't be measured in property or possessions, but in courage transmitted across generations. Courage to stand against power, to value truth above convenience, to believe persistence eventually balances against privilege. The most important inheritance wasn't the train itself, but faith in processes larger than individual lives. Faith her father had maintained through decades of solitary work, now continued through community commitment to shared purpose. That understanding connection across time, through shared values rather than mere materials, represented ultimate transformation of abandoned train cars into vessels carrying not just physical bodies, but collective aspiration. Robert Reynolds had preserved possibility. Sarah and her unlikely community would develop it into lived reality. The true journey had only begun.